Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Court Johnson. I'm the VP of Growth here at AtScale. I'd like to welcome you all to AtScale's Office Hours and a warm welcome back to those who joined us for last month's session. This is the second installment in a monthly series where we have a guest discuss topics pertaining to how AtScale helps organizations modernize their operational analytics. So today I'm excited because I'm joined by Matt Baird, who's a co-founder and CTO of AtScale. Matt has tremendous experience in the analytics space, having previously built software and managed teams at Inflection, Oracle, PeopleSoft, and Siebel. We asked Matt to join us today to talk about a topic that is arguably the most important issue in any enterprise, and that's data security. So in today's session, we'll have Matt explain what makes AtScale's security features unique, discuss the security decisions enterprises need to make when creating a self-service analytical data service. And as always, we'll finish with a few minutes of Q&A. So Matt, thanks again for joining.
Thanks, Court. And everybody that's attending, you have a commitment to security, and that's great because it is so critical. Every day when you open the news and you see something that happened that's terrible, you don't want to be that headline. So we're excited to talk about security today and our approach. I think what we've done is very in line with what enterprises need.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Matt. And as always, feel free to ask questions in the Q&A through Zoom, and we'll keep them and we'll bring them up to Matt at the end of our initial discussion. So Matt, let's start with a high-level question. Is there anything that you feel should be considered table stakes for enterprises when evaluating technology from a security perspective?
Yes, there are non-starters in any internet-based application, cloud-based or internal, which boils down specifically around encryption protocols, whether it's end-to-end TLS to prevent things like man-in-the-middle sniffing or listening attacks, or any sort of just easy to read data as it comes over the wire. That's a necessity. Now, there are some things that are very specific, even within TLS. There are different versions of TLS, some of them more secure than others. And even within a secure version of TLS, some of the configuration that you do at a code level is very important. So there's always details, but absolutely end-to-end TLS. And then for other protocols, when you're talking to enterprise systems that you're integrating with, so for instance, LDAP or Active Directory, that also has a secure protocol, and you should be using that. This is core. You have to have this. Every enterprise that we've sold to is using end-to-end TLS.
Yeah, that's great. And with security, there's sometimes a choice between following standards and opting to create custom security protocols. How have we at AtScale and our team approached this decision?
That's a great question. So we've opted towards supporting standards. I believe, and the company believes, that that's the right thing to do. Security is, at its very nature, tricky, and there are some very smart folks that have done all the math to figure out what's secure and what's not secure. If you find yourself inventing security, you may be in the wrong business. So, and when I say using standards around that, it's things like cores and standard REST and JWT on the REST and API side, and then there are other protocols that can be routed over secure transport, like JDBC and ODBC and XMLA, all being transferred over an end-to-end TLS solution. Kerberos, which we'll talk about later, that's a standard internally for supporting a ticketing system, which we can talk about in a bit. There's other security standards that absolutely you do not want to be reinventing, especially if you're in the encryption space. There's been so much research there, and I'd say every year you find out that something that's a little bit old has finally been cracked, and the security researchers are constantly inventing new ways to do it. So you got to be up to date. You do not want to reinvent that wheel.
Yeah, absolutely. Just from having worked with you and the team, it's amazing just to see the amount of thought that you guys put into all of these decisions. So one of the things we've heard from customers about security is that they love the fact that AtScale does not require them to move any data. Can we dig into why AtScale decided architecturally not to move data in its platform and why that decision is important?
Absolutely. So there's probably a number of reasons that moving data is not desirable. Let's talk about the first one, which is moving data. There's often a large amount of data, and that's going to take time, and it's going to reduce your agility and your performance. From a security perspective, movement of data means you're moving it out of something where you've spent time and effort configuring the security of that native system. So whether you have Hadoop or whether you're using BigQuery or Redshift or Snowflake or Oracle or SQL Server, they all have data security built in. And moving those to another system means that you either have to replicate that security, which creates an opportunity for a bug or a potential misconfiguration, or maybe it doesn't support the same security profile or set of features that your source system has. So maintaining all of the data in the same system of record means that you can apply the exact same security and entitlements to the data on every single query. The minute you move data out of your enterprise repository by loading it into an intermediate service server, or doing data extracts, that's another way data is moved, and moving it and feeding it out to Tableau or Excel, you've lost the data. You have to assume at that point that it's going into the ether, and potentially bad actors can get control of it. You also don't know who accessed it after that. You don't have, especially in the case of extracts, how many people have emailed an extract around because it's convenient. It's definitely convenient. There are other ways to get convenience and maintain security, though.
So let's shift gears a little bit and speak to some of the existing technology stack that our customers have and the security that they put around that existing technology. So we all know AtScale connects enterprise BI tools to their data. Each data platform has either built-in security, de jure security technology, or potentially third-party security technology. How does AtScale support those in a native way?
Yeah, so I touched on this a little bit earlier. So the integration with enterprise standard technologies to secure data is essential for a self-service platform. If you have a sort of Rube Goldberg approach to copying data out and reapplying security, you have to integrate and write code and do ETL, and there's so many problems that can occur in that pipeline. What we figured out is when we do the performance acceleration that AtScale provides on big data or on medium-sized data, we build tables that satisfy queries but faster. So if you have a fact table and it's got 1 billion rows, but the aggregation of that data, which is really what BI is interested in, might only be tens of thousands of rows, we will automatically see a query come in and substitute in our smaller aggregate table to answer that question faster. However, when you think about it, we've created a second table that's a derivative table. And now the SQL engine is connecting to that and pulling back the data. How do we know what the security is supposed to be on all these derivative tables? And the answer is in a patent that we filed, which allows us to check the security system before we substitute and accelerate. And that patent is guaranteed to, and we have tests and we've talked to vendors and we have partnerships, it's guaranteed to trigger that security system to tell us whether that person is entitled to view that data or not. And if they're not, even in this aggregated mode, it kicks them out and they are not allowed to see it. So in all senses, so your data is protected. We've done this on a number of third-party technologies, whether they're platform security plays like Sentry or Ranger on Hadoop, or whether they're the built-in more traditional database security or the cloud database. Even some of the newer sort of filter-based, I'd call them, approaches, Blue Talon and Immuta are two companies that come to mind, where they have security that applies both on the entitlement side as well as on data masking, things of that nature. Those are all applied transparently and seamlessly to the data as it comes out of AtScale. So I think I said it earlier, you don't want to repeat yourself. You don't want to create a software pipeline that moves data around. It means you don't want to replicate authorization systems. They need to consult the original so that when you make changes, it's instantly applied. If I'm sort of building software that tries to synchronize or tries to replicate your security features and keep them in sync, there's going to be a lag. That lag may be days or weeks. I don't know if it's manual. Who even knows? You have to potentially rebuild aggregate tables. All that stuff is not a great approach. You want to have the system consult the system of record for security at all times.
So my next question is a bit of a two-parter on data governance. So customers and prospects tell us all the time about the need to satisfy stringent data governance and access auditing policies. We also get a lot of questions around how granular AtScale is able to go in terms of associating queries with specific users. Can you speak to how AtScale handles those two aspects of data governance?
Absolutely. Before we start, let's talk a little bit about when you have a server-based architecture for accessing data. It's very common in server-based scenarios to have a pool of connections that connect with almost unlimited data rights. And this is from both a performance and a resource management perspective. Potentially, if you have tens of thousands of users and you wanted to use named connections, you'd have to have tens of thousands of connections, and some databases don't have that ability. What they do support, however, are concepts around delegation and impersonation. And on different platforms, there's different support for each one of these modes. They function slightly differently, but suffice to say that you can connect with a pool of connections that has a higher level of access, but then impersonate or substitute in a user at query time so that you trigger that platform's native security to act as though that user was accessing the data. These are blessed technology approaches from the vendor, whether it's on BigQuery or whether it's on Hadoop or whatever your data platform is. They generally support this, and it's part of their feature set. What we did with our technology, which we call true delegation, we ensure that every query executed on the data warehouse is associated with the end user who generated the query. And that means that when somebody logs in on Excel or on Tableau, single sign-on an NTLM network, that user is carried through Tableau to AtScale to the data warehouse, and end-to-end that identity is maintained and logged so that you have a proof, a record of who accessed the data and when they accessed it. And that's up to date because we're always accessing that security system up to date. The platform works seamlessly with all the data warehousing technologies, Sentry, Ranger, and the Hadoop ecosystem. Fully supports LDAP, Active Directory, and Kerberos end-to-end. So this really represents a best approach to a standards-based delegated authorization scenario.
So we've talked a lot about AtScale strategic approach to security, technical aspects of AtScale security program, and integrations with existing security protocols. The last topic I'd love for you to cover before we open it up to Q&A is any business-specific security features AtScale has that go beyond what's covered by platform and data warehouse-specific security?
Great question. And it's great because I did say don't invent your own security, and now I'm going to say, but maybe invent some security. And this is specifically because this security that we have built into AtScale is more at the business level. We still encourage you to use your platform security to do any sort of securing of data that you can. Because if you have those rules encoded into your data, that's the safest place, and that's where they belong, because AtScale is not going to be the only system that's accessing that data. However, in AtScale, what you're building are a set of structures or concepts that are more business oriented. And sometimes those business oriented concepts don't exist at the data level. So you need something where you can encode a higher order of security. So let's take, for instance, what we call a security dimension. You are a user that you're in marketing, and you want to look at rolled up marketing data for your country, and you're a country manager. So you're an organization that operates globally. You're in the United States. You should probably only be able to see that data in the United States. Now, in a core database, how you do that is you'd have to write a predicate or a filter or a where clause, whatever you want to call it, and you'd have to add on where country equals US. Now, if you're writing that query, you could just not include that, and suddenly it would return all the data. But AtScale security dimension lets us model this behind the scenes as somebody that's rolling out these data services, and put a connection into a country table and then map users so that whenever any query is executed from any BI tool or even via straight SQL, we will parse the query, interpret the query, go consult the security dimension, and pull in the where clause and make sure that that user transparently, without them knowing, is limited to just the data in the US. That's called a security dimension. The security dimension is highly dynamic. There are many different ways we can encode that information. So whatever business level security implications you have, we could probably model it within AtScale. We support, then that's row level. Column level is built via something that we call perspectives. And again, this is about taking your data and presenting it to the end user in a way that they both have entitlements to view it, as well as something that structures say a dashboard in a way that makes sense for that person's role in the organization. So perspectives, while they're not formally a security feature, they do allow for entitlements on column level data to be applied. So with the combination of those two features, column level and row level, you can actually effectively have cell level security. Those are approaches that you can't do in a database, because a database is a very horizontally focused set of technology. You can do row level, you can do some column level, but it's mapped to elements of the user that are available, say, in Active Directory, and not specifically from a BI perspective.
Yeah, this is all really great, Matt. And I know these are a lot of the topics that we had discussed that we wanted to bring up, but we're also getting some great questions from all the folks viewing the webinar today. So I'd encourage everybody, we're going to open it up now to Q&A. So continue to ask your questions, and I'm just kind of going through some questions that were asked here. But one question, Matt, that was asked is, how do we think about regulations like GDPR and HIPAA in a self-service BI situation?
Yeah, the regulation question comes up a lot. We've been working with some of the largest organizations in the world in spaces that are heavily regulated. I think 7 or 8 of the top 10 health insurance companies in the US and a lot of the major banks on Wall Street are customers. So, and everybody should be concerned with GDPR. So the thing about BI is there's big potential impact on BI systems around data minimization and storage limitations, and accuracy and the purpose limitations. I think the ones that are important are related to so let's talk about storage limitations for a second. That's clearly governed by regulation. In a BI world, aggregation is always an approach to acceleration. And if you don't maintain lineage, if the system doesn't know that this data was derived from this raw data, then making sure that you comply with storage limitations is very, very difficult. We maintain the aggregations automatically and transparently for the user, and we manage them cradle to grave. So you can set policy, and you can have processes that kick off and rebuild data or rebuild those aggregations if some data has dropped out of scope due to regulatory reasons. A lot of GDPR is based on the sort of data that you're storing, and while AtScale doesn't necessarily help with that, we do provide APIs and technology for eliminating limiting, masking, doing things of that nature to your data. In the HIPAA world, HIPAA is a different beast. You know, a lot of that is about, well, what is it? There's two titles, and then there's a privacy rule, the security rule, the enforcement rule, and the breach notification rule. Some of those have to be managed by the user and the enterprise. However, we do have a full entitlement system that ties into your Active Directory. And once you've set it up and mapped it, it's maintained transparently. So the minute you move somebody from one group to another and they no longer have access to that data, they no longer have access to the BI version of that data either. So privacy, we support the encryption, both at rest and over the wire. These are all elements of a security plan that your company has in order, and you have to evaluate your vendor and make sure that they're supporting all the same technology and regulation compliance that you need to roll out use cases. I think the hard part about self-service is the security element. I really do. I think that's the part that hangs everybody up, because it's the part when it's done wrong has the biggest ramifications. And it's also related to agility, in that to do security properly in a quick moving environment is really difficult without some level of automation, which has been our approach. We automate the data engineering, we automate the application of the proper security, and we always consult the original source systems to make sure that we're doing that correctly.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on what you've been saying, I mean, we've dealt with so many different customers across so many different industries. I would suggest that anyone out there who has a specific question around a particular regulation to reach out, and we're happy to dig into that on a case-by-case basis as well. So Matt, another question that came in asks, most data platforms are on Unix, but my users are all stored in a Windows domain. How does AtScale make that work so it's not an administrative nightmare?
Yeah, so you definitely, so I think specifically what this person's probably talking about is that Ranger and Sentry are accessing data in HDFS, which accesses sort of the POSIX system, and the user accounts are mostly, and the groups are mapped mostly onto Unix. Now, we've run into this. This is a big problem. People don't want to take every user that they have in AD, maybe they have 80,000, 100,000 end users that are going to access this data, and move them over. So what we created was a way to build a mapping between user groups. So while you still get the concept of a user being impersonated or delegated at the low level, you can apply the security of a group or role that you've mapped from AD into the POSIX account. This is fairly technical, but it is definitely a time and configuration nightmare if you don't have a feature like this. We're running a little bit late on time, so I'm answering complex questions as quickly as I can.
Yeah, and what we'll do, Matt, is we can dig into that with the person who asked. We can follow up after this as well. So maybe one last question here, as we're coming up on the half hour. The guest asks, I'm going to deploy in the cloud where some of my users are in Active Directory while others are in Cloud IAM. What's the best practice for deploying AtScale in this situation?
So Cloud IAM is Google's authentication and identity system. So I imagine these are folks that are going out on BigQuery, or maybe not. Maybe they have something else hosted in the cloud. The nice thing about these cloud databases, which is beautiful, is that there's not a lot of administration that you need to maintain. The part of the problem is they are out in the cloud. They are over a network interface. I've seen customers deploy in many different models. If they have external users that are accessing the data, so it's a BI use case where maybe they have vendors accessing data that they've been collecting on their behalf. Maybe it's a supply chain or a retail perspective, which I might guess because it's Google. You could deploy AtScale in the cloud, directly connected to IAM for all your source of authentication and ID. They can deploy behind their firewall if they want to have users that are connected into AD. So now you have single sign-on behind the firewall. That's convenience for your end users that live in your organization. Or third option is you take a product like Okta, and you're probably thinking about this already, and integrating and creating a synchronization between your on-prem LDAP into IAM. Regardless, we do support a multi-factor authentication model on your BI tools. Even if they themselves don't support it, we will generate and maintain tokens for multi-factor on products like Tableau or Excel or what other business intelligence tool you have.
Yeah, and what I'd say is just going a layer higher. We've dealt with so many different implementations and questions regarding different implementation situations that if you do have a specific question about how to implement at scale, totally feel free to reach out to us, and we're happy to dig into it on a case-by-case basis. Well, with that, Matt, I just wanted to thank you again for joining us. I know this isn't the sexiest of topics, but it might actually be the most important topic as data security is so important to the enterprise today. So thank you for taking the time. I'd encourage all of the attendees to stay tuned. We're putting together our January office hours, and we will be announcing that very soon. But with that, thanks to all who joined. Thank you, Matt, and hope everybody has a very safe and happy holiday. So,
thanks, Court. Thanks, everybody, for joining.